I don't even know if presenter name is. There's no presenter name in the program. So. You did not want me to present on disaster recovery.
Yeah, it's not state or disaster recovery, but.
Well, there could be a disaster at this point.
Well, that's it, you know.
How do you recover from this?
It might be a state route, I think.
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna walk you in and you guys have to figure out how to escape from here, okay? That's your disaster recovery.
Let's just talk about it ourselves.
Let's go. You guys are.
No, sit back down, guys.
Hey, anybody want me to you guys talk about what you're going to do with disaster?
Yeah, seriously, I'm not joking. I'll take over.
Go ahead.
I'm going to pick somebody to take over. It would be you.
All right, so my name's Andrew Sanders. I'm the Director of Technology at Yock School District. We're about 40 minutes away from here. So disaster recovery. Let's talk about that a little bit, because disaster recovery is probably, in some people's minds, a little bit different in one hand and different in the other. My approach to disaster recovery is, can I get my virtual machines booted up somewhere else? That's what I really see disaster recovery as, and how fast can I do it? I always use the example of, if, hey, my data center ever burnt down to the ground, I've got big problems because obviously if something burnt down to the ground, we're probably not having school regardless. So how much time before we have to get kids into another building? How much time do we have between paying people? How much time do I have in that scenario to get back up and running? It's not gonna probably be minutes or seconds like a financial company might want. It might be hours or days before I actually have to think about disaster recovery and getting things back up. So my scenario that I do, I have a QNAP server that sits at the data center. I back up to that, and then I have another QNAP server located in my middle school, which is about 8 miles away, and I back up to that. I know auditors question that kind of scenario. They are looking for larger geographical footprints for your data to be somewhere else. The perfect example that I've heard people use is when Hurricane Sandy came up the coast and New Jersey was completely underwater. There were scenarios of buildings within districts getting flooded. So if your offsite backup is in your district, well, hopefully in your district, it may have been flooded as well too. We had Connellsville School District. I'm not sure what happened. Apparently the sky opened up on them. My one technician is a volunteer firefighter. He was dealing with floods in Connellsville for 3 or 4 days. Their high school literally had water in their data center, and just the sky opened up one day out of the blue. Like, hopefully they had their data somewhere else. I don't think anything got fried, but hopefully it's off-site somewhere. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Amazon. Apparently they offer some backup solutions. There's Amazon Web Services. If you look at the Glacier tier, it's very, very attractive as far as price. I looked at just backing up my absolute mission critical servers, and I deem those as a couple domain controllers, my SIS, my financial system, and I think I had something else in there and I can't remember what it is, so obviously it's not mission critical at the moment. But I think ultimately I estimated 5 terabytes to back up to the cloud. With their online calculator, I think it was $200 a year to keep my data up there. And people were like, oh, if you put it up to Amazon, it's gonna cost you so much money to get it back.
Yeah, so, I mean, I kind of agree, like, we're all in here for some reason. Disaster recovery is kind of a dirty word, but one we all live with. And I don't know who was supposed to present or what was going on, and you kind of have your piece. My name is Chris Smith, Director of Technology at Cumberland Valley University State, and been, down this path of VR. And what I'm really working on is business continuity. Like, how do we just keep, stuff running when stuff goes bad? So we never came in here for some reason. There's a path to having a disaster recovery plan. There are templates out there. There are guides. There are schools that are doing something. Just like what I was interested in, from a show of hands, like your own reflective perception. Where are you? Like, one is just getting information, how to get started. I know I have to do something. A 2 is I'm on my way, or a 3 is we have it. I think we have a good plan and it's implementing and working. So just kind of hands up, show where you think you are. Where do you think you are right now?
Ones or 2? Just what 2?
2 to 3. Yeah, you never really want to say a 3, right? Because that's always something.
Or 3, whether that.
Yeah.
3 means there's probably documentation as well too.
Yes. Yeah. And that's because it's always a moving target. But I don't know if you guys and gals or anyone feel like I do. Like, I feel there's a lot of pressure that we have our stuff together, that people expect us to know what's going on, that we have things running, and we're behind the screen or the scene or the closet door or in the office, and we really know like it's okay, but it's not great.
Let me throw another little curveball in here.
Yeah.
Have you guys heard of this thing called ransomware? That's another thing about disaster recovery. Like, that's more likely to happen to us than a building burning down at this point. And some of this ransomware, truthfully, it can sit in backups for a year, and you don't even know. And you go back to get it, and you think you're okay, and you're nailed. Like, at least like with like getting the maybe like Amazon, like where I'm offloading like quarterly or every nightly or something like that, where it's just, I almost want to get to the security through obscurity almost. Like where I back up from my SIS manually, and put it on a disc and mail it to the mountains to be put in the mine shaft, just so that it's there. Okay, it might be 3 or 4 months out of date, but if I go back to people and I said, hey, my year-old backup that sits over here is encrypted, like, that's not good either. So we gotta start factoring in that other scenario there, because I think all of our approaches up to this point really have been, if something happens to the building, am I wrong really? Has anyone else thought anything different?
Here's the other question, how good really is your financial and sys backup that's quarter old? I mean, I guess it's better than nothing, but they're still not gonna be very happy with us.
And I tell them, when people ask me this, they're like, how fast can we get up? I'm like, when my financial system's down, I have vested interest in making sure that financial system comes back up. I have bills to pay. It'll get back up.
Yeah. The restore point on that, like if you restore back, let's say, I don't know, a month, you know, that's not good. Right?
Yeah.
So you have to tier your system. I mean, that's the first step you should do is tier your system. Say, okay, you know, we are not a business, so we're not losing, you know, $100 million every hour we're down like some big corporations are. But you need to set like, okay, and then set a time to that. How quickly do I need to have this recovered? Within 4 hours, a half a day, a full day, a week. So we have 4 tiers. And we look at all of our systems, whether they're hosted or you know, software as a service.
You guys went with CSIU. You guys are on the hosted. You're on the new platform, correct?
Depends which one. So
The web-based.
yeah. So no, we haven't moved yet.
Okay.
So
So
we still have a Fox Pro server.
okay,
in-house.
same as us.
We also host our sys, but we also have a ton of services in the cloud. So it's really about leveling what they are. And it's not just, you gotta get out, you gotta talk to your people, because you might think one thing, like, okay, it's pretty easy to establish financials, pretty easy to establish information, but, you know, hard access, camera systems, like, you know, we kind of push them around with talking with folks that rely on that, might have a different perspective. And what you can't do is put everything in tier 1. It's ridiculous to expect that, so you have to communicate what that might be. And then the next step for us is identifying what are the risks. Is it a flood? Is it a hurricane? Is it, you know, the boiler room blew up or the kitchen caught on fire? Like a lot of times it's those accidental things that catch you, or
The roof leaks all of a
yeah,
sudden, like.
the backup generators stop working. They hose you. The things you think are actually going to save you cause more problems.
Yeah.
It's not a natural disaster.
I actually had a server room catch on fire. Luckily, some people were there, and I mean, the server room was trashed, but the whole building was.
Did someone come in with a fire extinguisher? Did someone come in with a fire extinguisher?
They didn't come with a fire truck going on. It was right when I first started there. They decided they kept all their paper in there, everything. They were doing the wireless towers, lightning hit it, the paper, whole thing burned up. I mean, luckily.
And you know what? Sometimes, like when we talk about disaster recovery, cloud-hosted solutions might be the better scenario because that offloads it from you guys. To give you guys a little bit of background of my district, we have 2,000 kids. I roughly got around 200 employees in the district. It's me, and I have 2 technicians below me. We have 5 buildings that we support. And I don't pay my guys all that much, so I don't expect their skill levels to be up here. I kind of hopefully see them tier around what their salary is actually worth. So I can't expect them to think the way I do about things. So as far as, you know, setting up a network from the ground up, they couldn't do it. Can they change a VLAN? Absolutely. So I have to look at solutions sometimes in the cloud to offset my cost of needing additional support. So if you look at that and couple that with disaster recovery, that's how sometimes you can also pivot something into the cloud. I'm looking forward to the day I do take CSIU and we move it to them. It's going to be a $10,000 increase, but you know what? I tell people this, how many people are going to be in the room upset? How much is it going to cost to have every person in that room yelling at me? And does that justify that uptick? And think about the scenarios of if people pay their bills late. I did work at a district where they did not sit at payroll on time, and it caused people to pay their bills late, so the district had to reimburse the employees for their late bills. So that was thousands of dollars. So if we're going to argue about, you know, a $10,000 uptick every year, I can use that as an example as to, hey, this is why it makes sense to go to the cloud. It helps avoid these costs. Because if I get hit by a bus on the way to work, or I win the lottery, and there's problems, you know, you're not calling me, I'm out. So if you can call a cloud-based solution, that's a positive step in the right direction.
Keep in mind,
Just a quick question. You said you're using CSIU's online. We're just.
No, we're not there yet.
Oh, you're not there.
I can't wait to get there.
Okay, so you guys who are. One question I have for my business manager, just thinking about this ransomware and everything. Have they implemented two-factor authentication for their logins? Because
Is anyone looking forward to the day that they have to?
One password and lock everybody else out of our you know, and I'm sure they could get everything reset and get back in, but if it's payday, you know, and they're locking out everybody's account, I don't know, there's just things that are rattling through my mind after we had that ransomware discussion the other day.
keep in mind too, if that server is off-site and you lose your network connectivity, and you've got payroll on that server, and we do have payroll on our Microsoft server, then, we're off the grid. And I got a lot of people that aren't very happy with it.
Well, and so I actually have a secondary internet from Comcast. It's about $89 a month. It does not service anyone else other than my central office in the case that the internet goes down.
Well, there's more than one thing that can take the internet down.
Oh, yes.
A data center fire also takes the internet down.
Or the driver that hit the telephone pole outside that feeds your fiber and.
You know, you don't have, I'm sure nobody has 100% redundancy everywhere unless you have a budget like, you know, not a bank. And you know, that's another point of this, is you can't have a redundancy plan or a disaster recovery plan unless you have a disaster recovery budget. So if you already have existing systems, it's hard to get money to apply disaster recovery to those systems. But if you're going out for a new system, you should build a disaster recovery into it. We're trying to do that by going cloud, you know, with cloud management tools like Meraki, and you know, our SIS is hosted. And so every time we get a chance to go and put a system under somebody else's management, that removes that risk from us. It doesn't make it risk-free, but it makes it reduced risk and transfers the risk to them instead of on us.
And the blind belief that I have is that they have more securities in place than I do. Because when we think about security and I think about what I've got sometimes, I'm like, that just doesn't seem like enough to protect this valuable data. I like to hope that Cisco Meraki has.
Well, Cisco and Meraki, I think you're probably safe.
But the CSIU, I don't know. You know?
You can definitely ask, like you should ask them for,
Yep.
you know, firewall, everything that they have set, the same things that you put in place when you go into contract with anyone. Now you put more stuff in the cloud or on, you know, software service sites, you need to consider having a backup internet connection outside of your WAN if you're within an IU and bringing something in. We started in my last district with just like mobile hotspots that we had in the district office. Then we actually had like a car or a vehicle that was rigged with a rack and a big 3G antenna at the time, so that we could roll that thing right up into the building and connect it onto the district office in a closet and bring that over.
That had to be exciting to build that.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it wasn't that great.
It looked cool on paper.
Yeah, it was like a step towards us bringing in the secondary connection off of, you know, our WAN.
I will tell you guys this. I just recently am going. I'm literally going through this process right now. AT&T, they won a contract a few years ago. It's called FirstNet, I think it is.
It's first.
Yeah. It dramatically reduced our cell phone bill. I think for one of our administrators, like my cell phone, which would include unlimited texting, unlimited data, a hotspot, the iPhone XR is $1 for us. It's $47. That's $30 cheaper than what I was charging with AT&T. AT&T owns FirstNet, but here is the part that is the secret sauce. FirstNet in and of itself is a proprietary 700 megahertz range, I think it's 700 megahertz, network. It's for emergency first responders. Because when 9/11 happened, people couldn't use their cell phones, so they got that, sorry, your call can't be completed right now. Well, big government said, hey, we need a way to make sure that phone calls can go through. And it started off with first responders, then they've expanded to the school districts. Because, hey, sometimes things happen, people panic, people are making calls, and you can't get through. So they've expanded it to school districts. You can get hotspots, I think, for like $35, which we looked at Verizon. I think Verizon was $65 for us to get hotspots. So for $35 or $36 a month for a hotspot to sit around, that's relatively inexpensive. I get priority 1 service on my cell phone. So in the event of an emergency, I do get to actually make a phone call. I don't know if anyone else has issues with AT&T in their area. AT&T or Verizon are the only two in our area that really work. And we're switching over from AT&T to FirstNet, which ultimately is still the same. We're not even telling our board, really. We're just gonna tell them, like, look, we're saving X amount of dollars a month, and yeah, we're just doing it. Because how can you say no to having priority 1 service in the event of an emergency? Like, we can make a phone call. Argue with that. So.
Let's go back to the cloud backup thing. In Titusville, we're using Barracuda. You guys are familiar with that, or anyone else using it?
Love their mail archiver.
We
Love
have
it.
the option, we're paying $5,500 a year for unlimited storage in the cloud. So, you have to kind of decide on how much your data is worth to you. Some people may think that's a lot, maybe not, but that's what we're doing. And I'm backing up 9 terabytes of VMs weekly, so.
You know, to that point, like, my QNAP server, I think I spent maybe $6 grand on, and I use Veeam. I think my Veeam, I did like a multi-year subscription. I think it was like $3,000 or $4,000 to get me a 5-year subscription at the time. You know, but you start looking at it over a cost of like 5 years, it's a little bit cheaper, but he's got kind of the best of both worlds in that particular scenario. It's already off-site, it's up with Barracuda. They prioritize that type of storage, so hopefully they believe that you're backing it up, so in case their solution happens to have a snafu, that you have data still backed up there. I will say that, like, with my email archiver, it's something that I started to think about. I'm like, I've never really thought about backing that up. Like, what happens if my email archiver goes bad? Like, it's a Barracuda. I'm like, I've just assumed like my data's there. So I've started to quarterly back up that just to another server, just so I have backup of my email archiver. Now I also have Office 365. I do have e-discovery in place, so I've got backup there just in case something else happens. Is anyone using e-discovery at all? Have you had great success with that? Yeah. I haven't had horrible success, but I've had to access my email archiver on both sides. It's far and few between. I just don't know if I trust e-discovery yet.
Yeah, I use both. I mean, we have a Barracuda as well, so we'll typically go to e-discovery first.
Yeah.
Quick, easy fix, but yeah, that works well. That archiving thing is where I'm entrenched in right now back home, and that is how. So one of the things you have to consider is what's your exposure, what's your risk. We were talking about that last night. We didn't want to be, but so you talk about email archiver. There's no law that says how long you need to keep your email. You just have to have a setting that says it's a policy. That
Yeah, it's part of your policy. You have to specify X amount of time.
Yeah, so you can say 30 days if you want. I don't know that I advise that, but whatever it is. And there's a ton of records. So the thing I'm in the trenches with now is record retention. So I know if this server or this machine or this user gets compromised, what am I exposed to? How many, social security number or how much student PII is out there? And so we're trying to herd cats in all the departments and saying how long you have this document, where do you keep it, why do you have it, and set up a records retention schedule, payroll, transportation, food services, you name all of them. I've been doing it for about a year now, and about a month. I'm not going to be done because we have to always revisit it, but it's some tough conversations because I have hoarders, I have ignorance, I have people who get rid of everything, and you have
People that keep everything.
Yeah, you have to direct it and just come to a consensus, and that's been
So let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
Do you, on your data center, do you have any door access control or anything like that?
Yeah.
You do? Does anyone else?
Hard access.
Yeah. Because I know that's one of the things that we were dinged on back in like 2013. Like, they want to know who has access to those spaces. So we don't have door access control, but I have a form that says this person has this key at least. Now, it doesn't tell who comes and goes, but that's something else, like, hey, we copy our backups over to here. Can someone just come in and take that quickly and mosey on? Like, that's something else that's part of the disaster recovery that you need to think about a little bit too.
User access is another one, so like if we guarding or any of those, that's another one that we keep and store and people ask for, state auditors have asked us for, discipline data, but having that policy and just saying if we don't keep that, it's not a thing, covers your rear end, that, you know, we don't have it. There's no law saying you have to, unless it's just a different policy.
Does anyone have the perfect disaster recovery? I knew that was a little
Does anyone
question.
test it? Has anyone tested, you set up a routine schedule and actually test it?
We have a routine, but I mean, we've actually.
So when someone says they lost a
created
file.
To see, and, I mean, it's been a while since we did.
I'm not like purposely burning your data center, like I'm fucking.
We took it back out.
What's Jim doing today? He's got a gallon of gasoline.
Okay, yeah, that's, we say we do, or we really want to, but you get caught in the weeds and the mix of all things. We forget, it's not doing it great.
Like,
So, I have a question going back to what you said. You're backing up from one site to another, and I'm doing something similar. Does anybody else have a better solution aside from cloud to differentiated physical location backups?
you can talk to your IU.
Yeah, when I was at IU6, they talked about that, offering the space. There were no takers at the time, but.
Like, I know at IU13, you can rent rack space, and then I think you can also pay whatever for electricity or whatever. But and the nice thing about like IU13 in that particular scenario is, I think they have a few virtual environments there. So if you needed to stand something up, I'm sure IU13 might say, hey, we'll stand it up in your environment to get you up and running to get your payroll. You know, like that's one of the benefits I would like to think about the IU being available to us.
When I was at Conestoga Valley, the other CD in IU13, I actually did a partnership with another school district. And so we had 5 schools. And so moving an ER site to one of the other schools was only maybe a 10-mile radius, and I didn't feel like that was, great. We partnered with Omega Systems and actually did a backup of some key systems, and they pushed it out to a site in Ohio. But that was costly, so I actually just partnered with another Lancaster Lebanon school district, and they had rack space on our rack, and we had space on theirs, and we moved our systems to them. They were about 20 miles away.
The other thing is too is just remember, if you are going to put it somewhere, auditors are going to want to know what their process and procedures are. I have a friend that works in the private industry, and they go through ISO audits. AWS gets the check as soon as you say that's where your stuff is, because they know, because they audit Amazon, they already know what their process and procedures are, and that makes a very quick check mark for you to get that off.
Right.
So keep that in mind too. Fears, concerns? Who's using what for backups?
Who has cybersecurity insurance?
Yeah. I think we pay $7 grand a year.
Probably just, might not know that. I mean,
Who's used it?
I wouldn't know that unless the business manager brings it to me to fill out the form every
Right,
time.
because there's so many different kinds now, like that's up, yeah.
I would say almost everyone probably has it.
I know a municipality not too far from here. Ron, you may have heard Bethel Park municipality got nailed about 2 years ago. No, not you, but the municipality.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
I think the municipality about the
They got nailed by a moat, and within 24 hours, they already saw identity theft.
According to the NCFTA, National Cyber Forensics Training Alliance, down in Pittsburgh, and I was just there last week at a presentation. They say that at this point in time, you have to assume that if you have ransomware, that you first had data exfiltration, because what they're seeing is that today 90% of ransomware attacks are preceded by data exfiltration. So if they and that's like as the bad guys are leaving, they're putting the ransomware in place after they got your data.
So I was gonna say, so they get the best of both worlds there. Then they're gonna get your money afterwards, and your identity.
Right.
But I know they had a $10,000 deductible and they easily hit that $10,000 deductible before they had to bring in outside services to deal with it, and it was a new strain of the moat that came through and nailed them. But for 10 grand to bring someone else in, it is what it is at that point. I mean, I've heard of districts neighboring us that have been nailed by ransomware. I mean, it's a concern. You know, I still like to believe my backups are going to be good, but I still kind of also think that, you know, through some obscurity sometimes that might be my lifesaver, by just backing up to a CD or USB external drive and setting it in the server room somewhere hidden, just in case something happens. Because once they get in, I mean, if you've ever seen how fast the moat travels and gets into things, did anyone ever deal with Configure? From back in like what, 2009, 2010-ish? That thing spread so fast at the district that I was at, it wasn't even funny. And it wasn't even doing anything harmful at that time. They could have dumped all of our data before we were even realizing what was going on. Like Ron said, I mean, it's just, they're pulling data and moving on. But I use Veeam. I've been happy with Veeam for years. I think Dell bought something a few years ago to do backups. I don't know, is anyone using?
Yeah, Dell bought.
Was it Night Ranger or Ranger, or is it Ranger?
It's been through multiple names. It used to be, it's Dell Rapid Recovery now.
Okay.
And that's what we're using.
Is anyone relying just on SAN to SAN backup?
Yeah, we've been SAN to SAN for 8 years, and they're in two different buildings. So, and I got a 10 gig pipe between them, so there's no issue with speed.
Same model SANs or within iterations of each other?
Well, initially they were the same model, but when we updated our SANs, we put the SAN stores the backup slower capacity. And now we're looking, the next iteration, we're looking to get rid of that SAN altogether, replace it with, you know, a Barracuda or something like a Barracuda, like Cohesity. And Cohesity is, we're learning about that right now. It has an appliance and cloud piece. So, but I want all the SANs out of our data center. That's my long-term goal is for the data center to be a switch.
I'm trying to get there too. I'm trying to get as much stuff as I can eventually get to the cloud, because hey, if I got less stuff on site, it's less I have to theoretically worry about. I like to believe that.
Or their ass in mine, right?
Yeah. Again, I go back to that. They have more money than we do to put those safety and securities into place. And have you guys looked at Cisco AMP and Umbrella at all? If you haven't, you really should. I haven't jumped on it because at the time it didn't have a Mac client. Now they do. It kind of gives you that overview of where your traffic's going, how it's getting there. It can block things. I've heard some districts they're looking to just ditch their content filters and using Cisco, Umbrella, and AMP. Although I think it also goes back to archiving, because I think now we have to archive, I think there's a period of time we have to archive our internet traffic, and I don't know if the Cisco product does the full archiving for X amount of days or whatever.
You might want to read the article that posted yesterday on Firefox's enablement of, by default, of HTTP over, DNS over HTTPS, which totally obscures all DNS traffic from the likes of Cisco Umbrella.
That might explain something there for me too, because I didn't see traffic on my teacher's network, and I'm like, I know they're surfing the internet, and I'm like, that might be it right there.
It's on by default for all Firefox users as of yesterday in the United States.
Fantastic. We keep things up to date and
Cloud security.
yeah.
What's everyone doing with the, I call it the risk analysis, or if you do a risk assessment, where is the most risk? And the answer is your end users. You click on something, you go to the emails, phishing emails. Are you doing anything in education, phishing, campaigns? Aware that the state has got a contract with Cofence for pricing for that.
I signed up for that.
Phishing.
It was 81 cents or 87 cents a user. So I guess I got 200 people in my district. for $200 to have that package is a phenomenal deal. Because normally I think it's about $10 a person.
You ever heard of this before? So COFENSE, COFENSE, has a couple of different tools. They have some training videos and professional development around, being a smart end user. Questioning emails that come in, not clicking on links that you don't know. And you can create your own mock-up campaigns, they call them, where you can actually create your own mock-up email, send it out within your organization, and test people, catch them, and use it for, I try to use it as a gotcha moment, more of an educational one, like, hey, and then you sit down with them. We push it out to everyone early on in the year to say, hey, watch this, become familiar with it, and then here and there we'll put targeted ones, so something around payroll.
I was gonna say, right now is the time, I also talked to my payroll department and said, I'm like, hey, just keep in mind, if someone's asking for W-2s through email, do not do it. And like, this is a great way to test your payroll department. If you wanna be cheap, although $200 is very inexpensive, you can go with another product called GoFish. I've used that to hit my staff with. I literally just created my CoFence Fish Me account on Thursday this past week.
The difference between the free and like that cheap version of that one, that goes for about $8 a user.
Yeah.
The state really did a nice job of getting that down. Cause you can customize everything. So you can really make it, where the other ones, they have
it's
ads, they have pop-ups, it's still fine.
yeah.
It's better than
You can
that.
create custom PDFs, and when they open it up, they're like, you just fell for a phishing scam, and your computer could have been compromised. Like it puts a little fear into them. And I've done phishing trainings with my staff, and I've told them, like, look, this is not about trying to embarrass you, because I try to make it more relatable to them as a person. And I tell them, like, look, this is not just about what your job is, it's about your life at home. Think about your passwords. How many times do you reuse the same password for your bank, Amazon, Netflix, da-da-da-da-da? I'm like, think about that. Because all these hackers do, they'll take your email and they'll try to sign into all those services in a matter of seconds to see what they can get access to. So I try to make it as relatable to them as a person as possible, not to beat them up, scare them. I just want to try to educate them as much as I can, because if we don't do this, it's only going to continue to get worse. I mean, how many people have dealt with somebody clicked on something they shouldn't have, and now all of a sudden their email account is spamming the entire world? I was literally at a conference in California this past summer, and the group that I was with, I just jokingly said, I'm like, man, I hope a server catches on fire so I can go deal with that. And 5 minutes later, my superintendent secretary's email account started spamming the world. That's when you kind of got to stop and take care of that, because board members were getting emails, and in the end, all I'm trying to do is just protect people. So if they want to get offended by that, I apologize, but you can't unring that bell when it happens.
The biggest impact that we had to help with our staff was we put a header on every email that came from outside of the company. Read, be aware this is not from inside the school district, but saying, don't click on it, you can who they are. So they were annoyed for the first probably week because it was there, but
We did that too.
it's gone now.
You guys change it. Because, you should change it every year, like change the color or something like that. Because what happens is eventually these guys will get those emails. They know that you're putting that header. Change it up every year or every 6 months or something like that, just so it keeps people on their toes to look for that.
They also want to consider blocking use of any email client that is not a district sanctioned email client. We block Yahoo, we block Comcast, we block Verizon, anything our folks are allowed to use Gmail. Now they could potentially use their personal Gmail account, but they can't use their personal Yahoo account, because we have Board Mail, which filters all incoming email through the district Gmail, but doesn't know anything about Yahoo, it doesn't know anything about Comcast, it doesn't know anything about Verizon.
So you're blocking that on your mail server, or on your internet folder?
Blocking it on the firewall.
In the firewall.
Yeah, you're not allowed to go to the you wanna check that stuff, check it on your cell phone. Don't potentially plug up our computers with malware because you clicked on something in your Yahoo account. It came and downloaded on your local computer.
So something else you should also look at setting up is SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. I would highly recommend starting with SPF first, because if you set that up, that ultimately makes the next two parts so much easier. SPF, basically you go into your DNS and there's a string that you put in there. Then you go, I have Office 365, and there's a great article out there that someone wrote. It's a little bit crowded, I'll say, on the page, but if you read through it, eventually it gets to the 3 steps that you need to do to set it up on Office 365 to set up a mail rule that says check all incoming mail for this SPF record, and is it a valid IP address from one of our mail servers? If it's not, do this. So I instantly have a copy being sent to me, and it also puts the tag on there like, this could be a fraudulent email or something. I forget exactly what the words are I use there, but I make it obnoxious so that if you have done something to go through that email, you done, is the only way I can put it. Oh, live stream. But that, after learning what that was, I took, I had like my worry about my, I use mail server because we do an e-academy through them, and they send out emails as our district, so I had to add their IP address to our DNS entry. And honestly, all you have to do is when you get those fraudulent emails, go in and actually look at the header as text, and you'll eventually find out what IP addresses you needed to add. I talked to other districts that have set it up. Like they've had Blackboard that they had to modify a little bit, they could get their IP addresses. But if you do SPF, I think it's a little less of a intrusive footprint. Whereas if you set up like DKIM and DMARC, you can set up reject, so the email never even comes in. So if you start doing that, like you're not gonna be able to fix what you don't know what to fix just yet. So if you start with SPF first, it goes so much smoother. And honestly, it takes maybe an hour to set up, and I might be stretching that, but you'll watch it over a course of a few weeks, and over that course of a few weeks, it irons itself out. And yeah, if you really want to hear more about it, come see me at Tech Talk Live. I'll do a presentation on it. I'll probably also have co-fence there as well too, because that's something we just set up, because I hate phishing. It just destroys my day cleaning that mess up because someone saw an email from the superintendent that misspelled 9 words in there and doesn't look official at all, and yeah, clean that mess up. Are you guys back in your, how many Office 365 customers are in here? The rest are Gmail, I'm assuming, or hosted?
Hosted Exchange.
So yours is probably easy because you're probably just doing straight backups of that. Is anyone doing backups other than just archiving for Office 365 or Gmail, just out of curiosity? Because I've had calls about, hey, we can back up your entire mail from the cloud. I'm like, well, if I got an archive, why do I need to back it up? Just curious.
What's everyone's intentions for email? How long do you keep it? 7? Any 3 or under?
I'm indefinite.
We're at minimum of 1 year. Yeah.
Anyone else using Google Vault? No districts? I think right now it's unlimited. So our retention policy is forever.
So in your policy, so there's a couple of schools of thought here. If your policy says a year and you're doing indefinite, if something happens and it's available, you could bind yourself up. You know, it's kind of like one of these things that's like, do I want to have the information in case something happens, or do I not want to have it? And you kind of gotta, my superintendent's on board with us keeping everything, but having a year policy so that if we do forget something, if something doesn't show up and it's over a year old, it's not on us.
That's a playful football, and truly a decision that needs to come down to the top of administration.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have, superintendent and, administrative team support on that, it's a lose.
Yep.
So we, yeah, I would totally agree with that statement. I would also say that if you can, you have a record retention policy that references a record retention schedule, which is an administrative guideline. It's not a policy, because then you can update it without going through the board hoops to make it happen. Yeah, so that puts it on you as administrative senior leadership team, to set.
Put that designee in there and.
Correct. And the other thing that we did, that I think is, I would recommend, is in that policy, it actually names a record retention officer. So just like with some of the state laws, we have a name, security officer. In some districts, depending on your size, that might be a standalone person, or it's their superintendent, or someone else.
You may even want to make it like part of a committee.
The record retention officer, or?
Well, no, like, the retention creation of the policy, yeah, the
creation,
guidelines.
Definitely collaborate.
And
Those of us using Google Vault, one thing I learned at a recent Google workshop, if you delete that user, their emails go away out of Vault. And I didn't know that, I mean, I don't know how many other people, I didn't know that until like a few months ago.
I think it's like 30 days later.
Yeah.
Still, I mean, if your retention policy is 3 years and you delete somebody and 2 years later you need to retrieve their email, it's gone.
Yeah. I will say, Google, Ron was at the same presentation I was at back in November, Google Security Summit. We saw some pretty cool tools from Google coming out at that point. Did you use them much after that summit?
Yeah, we talked about it internally, and we decided that was way more money than what we were gonna spend on even what looked like pretty cool and useful tools. Because,
I had to run some reports the other day, and I was like, if I had those tools, they would have been very, very helpful for audit logs and everything, because while Google does give us a little bit of information, it doesn't give us everything. Like, I wanted to know if you log into Google and you go up to your profile, you can see what devices you've logged into with that. But on the admin side, I have not found a way to see where a user is logged in with that account, like what devices. And I think the enterprise tools gave us that ability to see that.
you're right, but nobody gives us an award for having the ability to spend more time researching email.
No, but if you can research it in 5 minutes and say it takes an hour sometimes and huff and puff a little bit, like that's gonna take some time. It also works in your benefit too. But I recently just had a scenario, and I think it's created enough justification for me to pull the trigger on that accountability. It stinks to say that you may have to pay extra for tools that you think should be available to you, but I understand what Google's saying. It costs money to make some of these tools available to you. My suggestion to them was just embed it in the cost of a Chromebook license and move on from there, because then it still keeps that stereotype of that Google's free, and now it's got free with an asterisk.
Chromebook license just went up, and I don't think it includes.
No, it does not. Are you guys, as far as like one-to-one, like, have you guys had to do any forensics on Chromebooks yet? What was your scenario? You don't have to give exact details, but like.
Yeah, working with local law enforcement, and the encryption on the solid state drives is ridiculous.
It's not like you just plug in like a Mac or a PC and like pull the information off.
You cannot take an image of that hard drive. Normally you would want a forensic image of the hard drive before you do anything to it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't take a forensic image of the solid state.
Okay.
Because we don't have the encryption key, it's a Google encryption key. So that turned into a mess that they had to figure out what to do, and basically we just had to go through the Chromebook thing.
Can they get it from Google with a warrant?
I don't know, I didn't ask that question, but I suspect probably not.
Four things to look forward to. We can't answer it, but it's technology, and we're expected to know everything and do everything, and fantastic.
I think there has to be a way to get it. And a warrant might be the best way to try, but I don't know the answer to that.
How's Safe to Say going for you guys? Any trickle down from that for you guys at all? Like having to pull information, because we've had kids, at 2:30 submitting the Safe to Say, and they're like, clearly it's just someone submitting a fake safe to say, and it's like we're trying to nip some of that in the bud. Any tips or tricks there at all? Anyone's run into?
How about the safe to say is actually hosted off some boat company out in the middle of the state to apparently last week let their certificate lapse for a day.
Fantastic.
Yeah, some of the emails were actually coming through that boat company, and so we had to find that site and unblock it.
More challenges. Okay. Anything else? All right. Don't have to go home, but you can't stay here, guys. No problem. Oh, we almost hit the hour mark too. No, I'm in the back end, like, you refund me my.
Right.
My registration.
Right, and give you a different badge that says presenter.
Well. See anything you wanna do next?
Well, $3,000 is like the intro price, and that's for you guys, because we have, small district for us, the intro price is significantly more, and I learned that I was actually calculating the price incorrectly, and so when I calculated the price correctly, it wasn't $15,000, I thought it was $20,000. Because I had a follow-up call with the Oregon, and we went through it. She said, oh, no, that's not your number, this is your number. It's like, oh, holy crap, I don't think so. And then, after the promotional's over, 3 years, because we signed up for it, we have to do promotional pricing. After the promotional pricing was over, it was like $40,000. And I was like, there's no way.
No, I would touch that.
So, I gotta look at it and say, well, if I'm gonna buy it now, if I'm doing so, I'm gonna be able to say, let's see if the guy can budget for it in 3 years. So what's the number that we need in 3 years? And when I realized it was going to take 3 years, it's like, I can't.
No.
What do you have?
I think tools are cool, but, we're not there yet. And, we will give you a lot of tools and the regular stuff, and I can do most of the work that I can do with those tools. I did talk to my younger organization about it, where they were let me buy $15,000. But, then I said, nah, we're not good.
Oh, I know, I talked to the yesterday. Is there any way I can see that promotional pricing? She's like, I think the promo price is different, it's a little bit more, she's saying it's $150, but you $200.
actually the company that built the software system. And so theory that influenced the contract for say, with the Department of Education. So that's fine, but really this year, I would have thought they would have put it on different domains. So, other than that, we don't think it's involved.
It's one of those that break down. Flushed out.
You don't keep your head in the sand for
I
so
have
long.
mixed thoughts about that. I think,
Yeah.
Potentially we could save one kid, well, maybe.
Alright, buddy.
On the other hand,
Safe travels.
you too, from a principal's perspective. And I'm not a principal, but from a principal's perspective, if I'm being told I now have additional duties that I have to do at night, I want, on-call pay.
I think we should go back to registration, but hey.
I had a feeling when I saw it on there, where it goes to show that, like, you don't have to have any detail, but it's on a lot of people's minds. Like, people just showed up because it was the title.
Yeah.
There was no presenter, there was no materials, there was no.
That's good conversation, good for taking a lead.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing, you know what, when I do my presentation about fishing,
Yeah.
this is the type of conversation I wanna have, because you know what? Me standing up there and lecturing, it's good to, you know what? I'm one person, I see it through this view,
Yeah.
you see it through this view, and ultimately, like, we can come to things and figure out better things.